Ed-0 Zombie Uprising. I think that's what it's called. I feel like it gets called Ed-0 in like the Japanese thing. So maybe it is Ed-0 Zombie Uprising. I don't know. The reason why I think it's called Ed-0 is because it's set in like feudal Japan kind of thing. But yeah, this is a game that I think it falls into the roguelike genre. I'm not 100% familiar with this genre. I've only really played Let It Die. And so in saying that, you're probably not gonna get a ton of like super deep insight to me of like how this game stands out in general. But I think what Ed-0 Zombie Uprising does is that it has like a really big diverse moveset for the characters in the game, and so it's like really satisfying to play in that way. But it's one of those games where it's really tough to start. It's going to be hard to get past the initial hump here, but once you start getting an idea of like how the game works, what all the items in the game does, it gives you the ability to create a variety of different builds. And because it's all kind of randomized, you're kind of forced in different builds, so you're trying a lot of different things based off like what the game is willing to provide you, kind of thing, right? So it's a little bit of a slow game. I feel like I could be wrong. These are like behind the back action roguelite style games. I feel like most of the time they kind of rely on like zombie enemies and things like that. So these kind of slower shambling enemies, and then they'll kind of like sprinkle in, harder enemies that might have better movement and things like that. So it's this kind of this feudal Japan setting that's going on, and aesthetically it's a little plain. It kind of looks like an Unreal Engine game, but you can turn on like a cell shading filter. So one of the things that is like, I don't know if this is like a good or a bad thing about the game, but it's got this like very PS2-esque look to it. And in some ways I kind of appreciate that. But when you just use like the raw visuals of the game, it does look a little plain overall. But it has I think the cell shading worked because this game has like this very like, I don't know how to call it, like Japanese classical art style painting look. I don't know what the art's called, where it's like on paper with like these calligraphy brushes and things like this. And the game itself doesn't really look like that, but it helps bring it closer to that aesthetic. And even like the story cutscenes are all narrated by like a very over the top sounding Japanese guy. And like there's this weird clacking sound, which I think is like the storyboards moving and like these pieces of wood clacking together. So I think they're going for a very specific thing here, even if I don't necessarily fully understand what they're going for aesthetically. So you basically have like three types of characters in here. You have a samurai who is on screen right now. If you're watching the video version of this, he's got these like big, wide, sweeping attacks that can kind of like clear crowds and things like that. You also have like a sumo wrestler. I didn't play him much, but he basically, I feel like, has a really good move set for like penetrating crowds, so you can kind of like push through enemies without taking a lot of damage. And then finally there's also like a ninja character, and the ninja character is probably one of the most diverse characters. It's high movement speed, low defense and things like that, but at the same time also a lot of high damage to individual enemies and things like that. So it's more about like kind of picking off enemies, and they're a lot better in my opinion about like fighting bosses or kind of like the tougher enemies in the game and things like that. So like any roguelite though, when you start, the level, you have just kind of this random set of stuff going on. It's not necessarily, I have the photos on screen. Oh yeah, there's the sumo guy. He's like the one time I played the sumo guy. You don't start with any like significant moveset. You basically just have like a very standard like combo kind of thing that you can do. And then as you play, or as you start your run, you can kind of pick up different moves, and those kind of play a role in like how much you're able to crowd control. And it really plays a role in like how you actually approach different situations and things like that. So a lot of this game is about getting a variety of like buffs and charms, and these charms have like more specific effects where it's like, oh, this charm increases your damage based off like how much money you have. Or this charm prevents you from getting intoxicated if you drink alcohol and things like that. So it's just a big, wide, like variety of items and things like that just have a lot of variety of different effects on you. And when you play on normal mode, all these items and their descriptions are pretty much given to you. I think when you play on a harder mode, it does obfuscate some of that, so you can use items without necessarily knowing what they do when you're in these high pressure situations. I think this randomization in roguelites it's all about kind of, I feel like, applying levels of pressure to the player to try to create different scenarios where they are either willing to take risks or are trying their hardest to avoid certain risks and things like that. And that creates a lot of tension and things like that. So, but because of this like whole like item and charm system that they have a lot of diversity in what you can do, because they don't just modify your character, they also can modify the enemies and things like that. So you can pick up charms that are like catches you on fire, and ideally you don't want to apply that to yourself because then you're on fire, unless you have a charm that like increases the damage while you're on fire. But you know, being on fire also hurts you and things like that, right? So it's this weird interconnected set of systems that almost reminds me a little bit of like Breath of the Wild, where like sometimes something being on fire gives you some benefit because like you can throw food at the enemy who's on fire that you lit on fire, and then you can cook the food by throwing it at them, basically. So it's just like this really interconnected world with a lot of systems that really encourage you to sit down and think about what's in your inventory, how you can use them, does it benefit you, does it hurt the enemy, and how these things kind of like interact with each other. And because it's all randomized, you never can really make one overpower build that like takes you through the rest of the game. When you go through these runs, every enemy gives you some money, and then as you upgrade your skills and things like that, your skills can also increase the amount of money that enemies give you when you kill them. But these moves, this money can basically be used back in town to kind of like buff your character and, give you, stat buffs that might not necessarily apply, or that might not necessarily make a huge difference, but they do try to give you a little bit of extra benefit. Like there's these, I don't know what you'd call them, like these pears and stuff that you can kind of eat. They're like glowing pears. And so you can upgrade the number of these pears you have, and that kind of can be a stat heal and things like that. You also have like a stamina meter as well, where you have to eat food and maintain. So every run you do feels substantially different from each other. Although as you kind of get an idea of like what you want and how to create certain builds, each run can definitely start to feel like, you're looking for these very specific things, and you just have to kind of make decisions of whether or not, what you want to do based off what you find and things like that. So, but overall, I think the thing that matters most to me in this game is that it feels like it just plays really well. I think the combat's really satisfying. I think also they really do a good job with level diversity. Where maybe early on it's not as apparent, but there are like a lot of corridor-based levels early on. But as you get into the other levels, there's like, Japanese villages, and all the buildings are like these kind of like 1 to 2 story buildings. And so you can kind of jump between the rooftops, and that gives you some benefits. Enemies can like hang out on the top of roofs and bomb you and things like that. There's like a boat level where there's a bunch of the boats are like booby trapped and things like that. So you have to kind of like avoid, the lasers going around and things like that, and find the thing that's like the security system essentially, and disable it and things like that. So each level I feel like feels pretty substantial, and I feel like each character's movesets generally feel really good for kind of dealing with crowds and things like that. So it's a game largely about crowd control, I feel like, overall, and just making sure you're keeping enemies, a distance away from you to prevent them from doing damage to you, which I think sounds like all video games, but maybe the important thing is that it is, because you have limited resources, it's important to prevent as much damage to you as possible, unless you really have a build that's built on that, or you have a build that just like keeps you at like a really high health. But I think that like stress pull of roguelites is like part of the appeal of this genre as a whole. And I think Ed-0 largely does that really well, and just generally makes it a very good playing game overall. Maybe the one issue is that sometimes it can get a little buggy. I did have one situation where I got stuck, and the game does have in the menu like a unstuck feature where you just go click it and it kind of teleports you back to the main floor. And I also had a level where this whole thing's like separated into like 10 floors. So it's like, oh, this dungeon's 10 floors. And I had one floor where the actual exit to the dungeon never spawned. And so I was just stuck on a floor where there's just no way to get out. And so I had to restart. So I guess it's a little buggy in some sense, but I think it is a very fun game overall. Very budget game, very D3-esque game for sure. But I think it's really, really enjoyable. So anyways, Ed-0 Zombie Uprising. The first PS5 game I've played, actually. So I don't know if there's anything super special about that game in terms of what I've played, but I think it just is a generally really solid game.